Hi everyone, my name is Roland, and in this session here, we're going to be talking about managing database roles with Active Directory LDAP for SOX compliance in your AWS environment. Okay, this is going to be quite sort of unique as it relates to databases. So if you're deploying Amazon RDS, Amazon Redshift, or any type of data source in Amazon in an AWS environment, I think you'll find it's very useful in terms of managing authentication and authorization. And we're just going to talk about some security principles that you may want to consider. So that's what we're going to talk about first in the agenda. Secondly, we'll talk about the problem with DBAs. And I'll get into that. If you're a DBA, you own data, please forgive me for that statement, but I'll explain more. Then we'll talk about database Active Directory LDAP enforcement. And then lastly, we'll talk about various solutions that you can deploy to manage Active Directory LDAP enforcement in your environment. Okay, has anyone heard of segregation of duty? That term before? Segregation of duty? Okay. This is, some people call it SOD. Basically, they're processes that are divided amongst individuals so that not one single individual has control over all of the enterprise's critical transactions, okay? So typically, from a database perspective, the DBA will not only manage the data, but also manage all the credential and the roles. And that is a violation of segregation of duty. You need to be able to segregate or divide, especially data access from, to a different party, and then let's say the DBA just manage the data. So the DBA should manage the data, and then maybe let the IT and security team manage the access and the secure access. This avoids risk in terms of errors, oversight, and fraud, and it provides accountability. If you have the DBA, which or the person who owns the data, manages the data, also own the access, he's given too much power, okay? And the security team, the InfoSec team, or the IT team needs to sort of get involved in this for that accountability. As I mentioned, this not only violates segregation of duty, but it also doesn't meet compliance, whether it be SOC 2, SOX, GDPR, PCI type of compliance. So distributing responsibilities prevents unauthorized actions, errors, and potential conflicts of interest, okay? So SOD is very important. The second one is the principle of least privilege. And basically, as the name says, users should be given the minimal level of access or permissions necessary to perform their function or job, okay? This also reduces the attack surface and potential misuse of elevated privileges. It lessens the chance of unintentional disruptions or damages from users, and also it meets compliance. Now, you may think, well, isn't that obvious, Roland, that we want to give them minimal access based on the role? If someone is an engineer or a security analyst or in marketing, they have a particular role and they're given a particular access to their data based on their role. That is true, but let me give you a scenario where there could be a time element. So based on your role, you may have access to data, but should you have access to it 24 hours a day? Should you have it only for a limited time? Maybe like a half an hour or for a week to do your particular project, and then have those privileges disabled, okay? So the principle of least privilege is not only based on the role, but there's also a time element and when you need to have access to that data. The third principle, key principle of security, is a zero trust model. So that is, this security model dictates that you should never trust and always verify. This means not automatically trusting any user or system, whether inside or outside the organization's perimeter, okay? So this addresses, for example, the modern threat landscape where traditional perimeter defenses like firewalls can be bypassed, okay? Because statistics show that over 70% of attacks actually happen inside, within the enterprise, not from outside. And if that's the case, how do you protect certain intrusion detection of attacks on the database, data leakage, when you're within the organization? Also, if you are a remote worker, which has really come to prominence, what happens is that the area of security now extends beyond the enterprise to the home now. And how do we make sure that the user who is accessing the data is that person that you're accessing the data, okay? So you can imagine the surface for which you want, the environmental surface for which you want to secure now has extended, and there's dangers there. So the key takeaway is to validate every transaction irrespective of origin, ensuring robust protection, especially today where there's remote work and things are done in the cloud. Okay, this has to do with SOD, but databases as a super user, as I mentioned, typically DBAs have keys to the kingdom. They not only manage the data, but they also manage the credentials as well as group members, creating the group roles and the group membership. And that's a lot of power. If someone can breach and become a super user, that is also a big danger. And that's why SOD is very important to distribute a lot of those responsibility. So let's talk about how data access works today from an Active Directory or LDAP perspective. Active Directory is used over 90% of enterprises use Active Directory. The issue today is that if you are deploying databases like Postgres, MySQL, MariaDB, open source databases, they do not have authorization supported. Does anyone deploy any of those open source databases today? Okay. They can support authentication, and that being passing your username and password, integrating to LDAP. But what typically has to happen for Postgres and MySQL is that the DBA or the person needs to manually create the role. And you have a separate authorization mechanism other than Active Directory that you have to manage. And that's risk there. It's a lot of manual work. And it doesn't really it doesn't really need to happen. So like, for example, SQL Server does have a seamless AD integration using Windows authentication. It can authenticate on username and password, and it can create groups. So you can map a role to a group. So it can enforce Active Directory policies. But as we all know, not everyone is using SQL Server today, okay? So that leaves a hole for some of the databases, like Postgres and MySQL. While AD and LDAP simplify user authentication, detailed user management and authorization in databases is still very manual, okay? And is there some solutions that can solve that problem? SQL Server is one of them. It can support authentication and authorization in enforcing those policies. So what I mean by that is you can direct all, you can direct all users to SQL Server, and it will automatically authenticate, pass the username and password, and then map your group membership to based on your group membership, you will get data access relative to your membership and role, okay? Another solution is using a database proxy, and a proxy can help enforce Active Directory and LDAP policies as well. And that's done without any code changes, and there's no manual work. And the very fact that a database proxy is doing that will support segregation of duty, meet the segregation of duty compliance, because the database administrator for, let's say, Amazon RDS does not have to manually create those roles. It will get those group membership and those roles from Active Directory. So the IT or the InfoSec team has already predefined the username and password and the group membership. So that proxy is just going to get that information, authenticate, and then understand their group role and give them access, Amazon RDS access based on their group membership. Okay? There's also some very good auditing as well that you would want to consider. Basically, when you have credentials all over the place in the application, in Active Directory, and then in the database, it is very messy. There could be some data leakage as well, especially if engineers were to leave. You don't know who has access to what, where their credentials are. It is highly recommended that you centralize all your credentials, your group membership, into one place. It could be Okta, it could be Active Directory, it could be some type of jump cloud, it could be some LDAP mechanism. But best practices is to centralize it in one place and have one person, one group basically own it, and not be the data team, which historically it has been. Okay? And one of the things that the proxy can do as well as SQL Server is do a very good auditing of who accessed what when. And that's a common problem today in industry, is just having the visibility of knowing who has access to sensitive data, okay? But again, the problem today is that SQL Server is probably the only database that does it. Many people do homegrown solutions today to get this visibility and to solve this problem of centralizing the credentials with data access. Deploying a database proxy would also potentially help as well. I'm going to stop there. We have a few minutes, because it's a short session, to entertain any questions. Yes? Oh, yeah. So the question was, some proxies can support honey token detection. This is a way to identify a security breach. And what you do is you create an entry in the table, like foo or something like that. And what ends up happening, and it's just a fake entry that you would not normally, a user would not normally request or query. And when someone queries that, it could be highly suspect. So you're putting a honey token into the database to sort of bait to see if there could be any potential breach in the data. The question was, what is the role of the database proxy for honey token? It provides that functionality where you can put that token in there and then provide that detection that if someone were to query that. Yes, that's correct. Yeah, it manages that feature, basically. It supports that feature. Yeah. And then a database firewall, obviously, some other things is it can rate limit the number of queries so it doesn't overwhelm the database. It could do data masking for social security numbers, credit card numbers, that when you retrieve data. So a database firewall could also help as well. Any other questions regarding Active Directory? LDAP integration? Good question. Okay, so just a little bit about some proxying, just about the Heimdall database proxy, we had actually announced this at reInvent. Something that you might find interesting is that we can do Active Directory enforcement. So when there are users that are directly connected to the database, we can authenticate against against Active Directory, and then we will understand what their group role is, their group membership, and then based upon that, give them access to the database. Users and roles are synchronized into the database. We provide very good audit logs into CloudWatch of who accessed what when. We'll provide a one-click report of who has access to sensitive data. I think this has been a huge challenge for enterprises of how to get visibility quickly of who has access to sensitive data. When you have multiple databases in large enterprise, you can get that data, but you have to go to each group, and each group has, whether it be Oracle, SQL Server, or Postgres, they all have different tooling, and there is a delay to get that information. Using some proxy, or if you use SQL Server, it becomes a lot simpler of just getting that information. And then, as you guys know, probably know, logs are very tedious. It's a strenuous exercise to extrapolate that information from logs. If there's a way to get a really nice report where you can just give it to management to understand who has access to tables, it's very convenient to help meet compliance. Okay? Any other questions so far? All right. Let's keep going. So another piece too, just want to let you know just about proxies, is that it has approval chain access, so or mechanism. So if this has to do with principle of least privilege. You want to provide that person who has that job just what he needs. And if he needs additional access, then is there a way that you can, a method or a process by which he or she can ask requests for additional data access, and they can put a justification. Proxies can do that, where you have a portal and you put down, hey, I want to access this table, this piece of data, this database, and this is the reason why. And then an email will be sent to the manager. They'll review the justification and who's asking, and grant access, full access, or maybe a limited amount of time. Okay, I think that could be very useful as well. So let me sum it all up here, and I'll entertain questions. So we have segregation of duty, so that when you apply principles of data access, the data team should not be owning or managing the data and the credentials, okay? That should be divided amongst individuals or groups. So it would be good that the credentials and data access be managed by InfoSec or by IT, and the data team manage the data. That helps meet compliance. And this is a tough one amongst industry that we've seen, that there isn't really a standout solution for this, and a lot of times they have to do homegrown. That's why I mentioned that SQL Server and maybe deploying a proxy could help. Second one is principle of least privilege. Users are given minimal access of data, and then based on their role or their need to access, there should be a process to ask for permission to get additional data access. And then a zero trust model, never trust, always verify. Just the fact that the working environment is going outside of the company now at home or other places in the cloud, you just want to make sure that you can always identify the user when they access the data. And even with service accounts now, like SharePoint, Tableau, even that is an issue. There's typically many users that represent one connection to the database. And there isn't visibility of who is accessing the data. And that's purely an artifact of the application today. And I think that's slowly going to change, where people are seeing, customers are seeing that service accounts are not secure enough. There's not enough visibility. And I think we're going to see a trend where these service accounts will provide visibility to the database of every single user accessing data. Okay, we have a few minutes left. Are there any questions about data access, Active Directory, LDAP enforcement? Any questions, comments? All right, thank you.